The coffee had gone cold 47 minutes ago. Claire Montgomery tracked time the way most people track debts, counting each minute as currency she could never reclaim. The ceramic mug sat before her on a table, scarred with initials and coffee rings, steam long since dissipated into the warm air of the cafe. Outside Christmas lights blinked their eternal rhythm against frosted windows, red and gold and green, casting colored shadows across the hardwood floor. Inside, beneath the low murmur of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine, silence wrapped around her like a second skin. She had become a spectacle without meaning to. The woman in the designer coat alone on Christmas Eve, checking her phone with the kind of precision that suggested she was waiting for something important. Or someone. The barista had already made two passes by her table each time, slowing just enough to gauge whether she needed rescuing. The couple at the next table whispered behind raised hands, their pity as palpable as the cinnamon scent drifting from the kitchen. Claire knew what they thought. Stood up, abandoned. Another woman who had dressed too carefully for a man who hadn't bothered to show. They were wrong, of course. Or perhaps they were right in ways that mattered more than punctuality. She had arrived at 7:30, exactly 15 minutes early, because arriving on time meant you were already late. That principle had served her well in boardrooms and negotiations and the careful choreography of corporate warfare where milliseconds could mean millions. Margaret had chosen this place, a small cafe on Maple Street that Claire had driven past 1,000 times without ever noticing. No valet parking, no sommelier, no tables reserved for people whose names carried weight. Just mismatched chairs and hand-painted ornaments hanging from exposed beams, the kind of deliberately casual atmosphere that cost nothing and meant everything. The first 10 minutes Claire had occupied herself with email. 17 new messages, most of them urgent in the way that nothing was truly urgent anymore. Her CFO wanted approval on the quarterly projections. Her publicist needed a statement about the merger rumors that kept circulating despite 3 separate denials. Her lawyer had sent another draft of the settlement agreement, this one, with highlighted sections where her ex-husband's attorney had added new demands. She had closed her email at minute 12. The next 15 minutes she had studied the other patrons. A family in the corner booth, 3 generations crammed around a table meant for 4, laughing at something the grandmother said. 2 college students by the window, textbooks spread between them, occasionally glancing up to share a smile that suggested studying was not their primary objective. An elderly man at the counter nursing a coffee and a newspaper, the kind of person who came to cafes not for the coffee, but for the presence of other human beings. People who belonged to each other or to themselves or to this moment in ways Claire had forgotten how to access. At minute 27, the barista had approached with the second cup of coffee. He was young, maybe 23, with a nose ring and a flannel shirt worn soft at the elbows. He set the cup down without speaking, his eyes carrying that particular mixture of kindness and discomfort reserved for witnessing someone else's misfortune. Claire had wrapped her hands around the mug, feeling its warmth seep into her palms. 3 months ago, her hands had worn a platinum wedding band that cost more than most people earned in a year. Now they were bare except for the faint tan line that refused to fade, a ghost of what she had chosen to leave behind. Or what had chosen to leave her. The distinction grew murkier each day. The divorce had been finalized on a Tuesday, not a special Tuesday, not an anniversary or a birthday, or any date that carried symbolic weight. Just a Tuesday in September when 2 people who had once promised forever signed papers that said, actually never mind. Her ex-husband had worn his courtroom face, the one she recognized from business dinners and investor meetings, pleasant and distant and thoroughly unreachable. He had shaken her hand afterward, a gesture so absurd Claire had almost laughed. Almost. You never waited for anything, he had said in the hallway outside the courtroom, his voice carrying none of the anger she might have preferred. Not for me, not for us. You were always 10 steps ahead, and I got tired of chasing. Claire had not cried then. She had nodded, collected her briefcase, and returned to the office for a 3-hour strategy session about expanding into the Asian markets. Crying was for people who had time, and Claire Montgomery had never had time for anything except forward motion. Now she was waiting, and time had become elastic and strange. Minute 34 brought a text from Margaret. How's it going? Is he nice? Claire had stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard, searching for words that would not reveal how thoroughly she was failing at something as simple as a blind date. She had typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, still here. Margaret had replied immediately with a string of emojis, hearts, and champagne glasses, And that little dancing woman in the red dress because Margaret believed in optimism, the way other people believed in gravity. Margaret had arranged this entire evening with the enthusiasm of someone who had never experienced a bad first date. They had met for lunch at that place in Midtown with the $15 salads where Margaret had shown Claire a photo on her phone of a man with kind eyes and dark hair holding a little girl who wore a smile that suggested she had never encountered a reason not to. He's not what you're used to, Margaret had said, which Claire recognized as code for not wealthy, not powerful, not the kind of man who moved in circles where people knew your name before you entered a room. But he's good, Claire, really good, and I think you need good right now. Claire had opened her mouth to decline. She had a company to run a board meeting scheduled for the day after Christmas, a PR crisis simmering because her CFO had leaked preliminary numbers to a journalist who specialized in making minor discrepancies sound like federal crimes. She had spreadsheets to review and contracts to negotiate and approximately 700 reasons why blind dates on Christmas Eve were not how successful people spent their time. Instead, she had heard herself say yes. Now at minute 41, she wondered if she had made that choice or if the choice had been made for her by the cumulative weight of all the nights she had returned to a penthouse, empty except for city lights and silence. Her phone vibrated with a new email. The subject line read, "Urgent board member concerns, re-leadership." Claire swiped it away without opening it. Whatever crisis was unfolding in the carefully climate-controlled offices of Montgomery Enterprises could wait. Everything could always wait, except apparently for her. Minute 45. The family in the corner booth stood to leave, pulling on coats and winding scarves around necks, still laughing about something. The father hoisted the youngest child onto his shoulders, and the grandmother said something that made everyone groan. They moved toward the door in a cluster, bumping into each other with the casual intimacy of people who had long since stopped apologizing for taking up space. Claire watched them go, feeling something sharp and nameless lodge beneath her ribs. The elderly man at the counter folded his newspaper, paid his bill, nodded to the barista with the familiarity of routine. The college students had given up all pretense of studying, hands now intertwined across the table, speaking in voices too low to hear, but too intimate to mistake. The cafe was emptying, Christmas Eve, claiming its territory, pulling people home to wherever home meant. Claire should leave. Every rational calculation said to stand, collect her coat, walk out with her dignity intact. She had waited long enough to prove something to Margaret, to herself, to the ghost of her ex-husband's accusations that still echoed in her skull. She had tried. That should count for something. Her legs did not move. Minute 47 arrived with the weight of a verdict. Claire checked her phone one final time. No messages, no missed calls, nothing but the screen, reflecting her own face back at her. She looked tired. When had she started looking so tired? The door opened, bringing with it a gust of December air and the scent of snow. Claire glanced up reflexively, then back at her phone, unwilling to watch another happy couple or intact family parade their wholeness through her line of sight. But something made her look again. The man in the doorway was exactly the kind of person who looked like he had fought through hell to get there. His jacket, a worn canvas thing that might have once been navy blue, clung to his shoulders in dark patches where snow had melted into fabric. His jeans bore splashes of something wet, slush probably, or the particular grime of city sidewalks after the first snow. His hair, dark and slightly too long, was plastered against his forehead in a way that suggested neither style nor intention, just the consequence of running through weather without an umbrella. He stood still for a moment, scanning the room with eyes that carried exhaustion in every line. When his gaze found hers, something shifted in his expression. Relief, pure unguarded relief, the kind that people usually learn to hide by the time they reached adulthood. He crossed the cafe in quick strides, and Claire noticed peripherally how the remaining patrons watched him with puzzled curiosity. He did not belong here in this artisanal coffee shop with its oat milk lattes and locally sourced pastries. Or perhaps he belonged here more than Claire did, with her Burberry coat and her Louboutin heels and her armor of expensive things that had never made her feel less alone. He stopped at her table, breathing hard water dripping from his jacket onto the hardwood floor. Claire could see the rise and fall of his chest, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. His voice came out rougher than she expected, lower, carrying the rasp of someone who had been shouting or crying, or both. "I'm so sorry. I'm David. My daughter was sick. I couldn't." The sentence dissolved mid-thought as if he had suddenly become aware of the puddle forming around his boots. Claire stood her heels, bringing her almost eye level with him. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched into the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from fear rather than mere lack of sleep. He smelled faintly of antiseptic and something else lavender, maybe the ghost of children's soap. Her voice emerged cooler than she intended, the professional tone she used in boardrooms when she needed to establish boundaries without giving offense. It's fine, I understand. David's gaze dropped to the two coffee cups on the table, one empty, one untouched. Then back to her face, searching for something. You waited. Claire felt the simple observation land with more weight than it should. I did. Why the question was too direct, too honest for a first meeting between strangers. Most people would have deflected with humor or false modesty, made some joke about having nothing better to do. But David just stood there, dripping onto the floor, waiting for an answer he seemed to genuinely want. Claire sat back down, and after a moment, David took the seat across from her. The barista materialized with a towel, which David accepted with a quiet thank you that carried actual gratitude rather than mere politeness. He dried his face, his hands the back of his neck moving with careful economy. His fingers were calloused, Claire noticed. Working hands, not the manicured hands of men who spent their days in climate-controlled offices pushing paper and power in equal measure. She found herself asking, "How's your daughter? She's okay. High fever, but it broke about an hour ago. She's home now." Sleeping. Had David folded the towel and set it on the edge of the table with the precision of someone trying to minimize the disruption of his presence. I tried to text you. The signal in the ER waiting room is terrible. Emergency room. Claire felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the defense wall she had constructed around this evening. You were at the hospital. Yeah, David picked up the menu, set it down again without looking at it. His hands shook just slightly. A tremor he seemed unable to control. I thought about canceling, but Emma, that's my daughter, she told me I should come. She said you might be nice. The observation landed with unexpected force. Claire heard herself ask, am I? David looked at her, then really looked, and Claire felt the full weight of his attention. It was not invasive or presumptuous, not the calculating assessment of men who were always measuring and judging and finding ways to leverage what they saw. This was different, careful, considerate, like he was trying to see past the designer coat and the perfect hair to whatever lived underneath. His answer came slowly, I don't know yet. But you waited, so maybe. The couple at the next table stood to leave, and in the brief silence that followed, Claire became aware of her own heartbeat loud in her ears. She reached for her coffee, the second one still warm, and took a sip. Too sweet. The barista had added sugar without asking. She drank it anyway. Margaret said you're a plumber. I am. Do you like it? David's mouth twitched, almost a smile. It pays the bills. Keeps Emma fed. That's what matters. That's not what I asked. He leaned back in his chair and some of the tension seemed to leave his shoulders. No, it's not what I'd choose if I had a choice. But I do it well and people need me, so that counts for something. Claire thought about her own work, the endless board meetings and acquisitions, the strategy sessions where she moved money around like pieces on a chessboard. People needed what she provided. Jobs, returns on investment, the steady hand of leadership that kept a corporation profitable. But did they need her or just the function she performed? She heard herself ask, what would you choose if you had a choice? David was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the snow fell harder now, blurring the Christmas lights into soft halos. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a door opening onto a room he had kept locked. I used to be an architect. Designed houses mostly. Custom builds. I liked the idea of creating spaces where people could be happy. Why did you stop? My wife got sick. His jaw tightened, the only outward sign of whatever storm moved beneath the surface cancer. By the time she was gone, I had medical bills that would have buried us. Plumbing pays better than entry-level architecture, and I could start right away, so I did. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was 3 years ago. We're okay now, Emma and me. He said it like a mantra, like if he repeated it enough times, it might become true rather than simply necessary. The barista returned this time with a notepad. David ordered water, just water. Claire watched the way his eyes skipped over the menu, avoiding the prices, doing the mental arithmetic of someone who had learned to measure everything against the cost of survival. Something in her chest tightened. Get something to eat. Please, I'm fine. She waited until he looked at her. Get something to eat. He ordered a sandwich. Turkey and Swiss, the cheapest item on the menu. When the barista left, Claire felt the weight of silence between them, heavy and awkward, and strangely intimate. You didn't have to do that, David said. I know. I can pay for myself. I know that too. He studied her for a moment, and Claire had the unsettling feeling that he could see straight through every defense she had spent 15 years constructing. Why did you really wait? Claire did not have a quick answer this time. She thought about the last 3 months, the divorce proceedings that had felt more like a business dissolution than the end of a marriage. The empty penthouse where she woke up each morning and forgot, just for a second, that there was no one beside her anymore. The slow creeping realization that she had built an empire and lost something she could not name. Margaret's voice on the phone came back to her, gentle but firm. You need to try, Claire. Just try. Her answer emerged slowly, each word a small act of vulnerability she had not planned. I think I was hoping someone would wait for me too. David did not speak. He just nodded, a gesture that suggested he understood exactly what she meant, had perhaps been carrying the same hope without articulation. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his entire face softened in a way that made Claire's throat tighten. It's Emma, he said, almost apologetic, then swiped to answer. Claire heard a small, hoarse voice on the other end. Daddy, hey baby, you okay? Yeah, I took my medicine. When are you coming home? David's thumb traced the edge of his phone, a nervous gesture that seemed unconscious. Soon, real soon. Is the lady nice? Claire felt something lodge beneath her ribs. David's eyes flicked to hers, and for a moment she saw something raw and unguarded in his expression, the kind of emotion people usually reserve for private moments rather than first dates with strangers. His voice came soft. Very nice. Good. You deserve someone nice, Daddy. Claire looked away, focusing on the Christmas lights outside. Red, gold, green. Red, gold, green. The rhythm steady and unchanging while everything else shifted. I'll be home in a bit. Okay, you need anything? No. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm okay, sweetheart. I promise. Okay. Love you. Love you too. David ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. He did not speak for a long moment, and Claire did not push. She understood somehow that this silence was its own kind of conversation, saying things neither of them had words for yet. Finally, she worries about me. She's 7 and she worries about me. That's not how it's supposed to work. She loves you. I know. But sometimes I think she'd be better off if I could give her more. A real house instead of a 2-bedroom apartment. A mom who's actually there instead of just a memory she's starting to forget. He stopped, shook his head. Sorry. You didn't sign up for this. Didn't I? Claire asked, her voice quieter than before. Margaret said you were a good father. She didn't mention anything else. What else is there? The question hung between them, simple and devastating. Claire thought about all the things she used to believe mattered. The corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. The 7-figure salary. The invitations to galas and fundraisers where everyone smiled and no one was happy. What else is there? She repeated internally and found no answer that satisfied. The barista brought David's sandwich, and he ate it slowly, methodically, with the care of someone who had learned not to waste food. Claire watched without meaning to noticing small things. The way he wiped his mouth with a napkin after every few bites. The way he said thank you when the barista refilled his water. Ordinary things that her ex-husband had stopped doing somewhere along the way when courtesy had become optional rather than essential. Can I ask you something? David said, setting down the last quarter of his sandwich. Go ahead. Why are you here, really? A woman like you could be anywhere doing anything. Why a blind date with a plumber on Christmas Eve? Claire considered lying. It would be easy boredom, curiosity doing Margaret a favor. But something about the way David was looking at her, patient and open, made the truth feel less dangerous than usual. Her voice emerged steady, because I'm tired of being alone. And I'm tired of pretending I'm not. David nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. Do you? Emma drew me a picture this morning. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, smoothed it carefully on the table between them. She wanted me to bring it. For luck, she said. Claire leaned forward. The drawing was simple stick figures in crayon, a man and a woman holding hands. Above them, Emma had written in wobbly letters, Daddy and his new friend. Merry Christmas. There was a small smudge in the corner like someone had cried and tried to wipe it away. She wants you to be happy, Claire said quietly. She wants me to have what she can't give me. David's voice remained steady, but Claire heard the fracture beneath it. She's 7 years old and she thinks it's her job to fix me. Claire's hand moved before she could think about it, reaching across the table to touch his wrist. Just briefly, just enough to ground him. You're not broken. David looked at her hand, then at her face. How do you know? Because broken people don't show up 47 minutes late to a blind date and still apologize. He almost smiled at that. Almost. I should go. Emma's alone and I don't like leaving her too long, even when she's sleeping. I understand. David stood, pulled out his wallet. Claire saw the worn leather, the frayed edges, the careful way he counted out bills for the sandwich. She wanted to tell him not to bother, that she would take care of it, but she knew somehow that offering would hurt more than help. Thank you for waiting, David said. I know it probably seemed don't. Claire interrupted gently. Don't apologize again. You're here, that's what matters. He tucked Emma's drawing back into his pocket, and Claire felt a sudden, irrational urge to ask him to stay. Just a little longer. Just until the snow stopped or the cafe closed, or she could figure out why this felt different from every other first date she had endured. Can I? David stopped, started again. Can I see you again? Or was this enough? Claire stood gathering her coat and purse in the carefully constructed composure that usually served as armor. Do you have plans for the rest of the night, just going home to Emma? Can I come with you? The question surprised them both. David blinked and Claire felt heat rise in her cheeks, a sensation she had not experienced in years. I don't mean I know what you mean. David held up a hand, not quite smiling, but not quite not. Emma said she wanted to bake cookies tonight. She's probably too sick, but if you wanted to, if you don't mind, I'd like that, Claire said and meant it. They walked out into the snow, together side by side, but not touching. Claire felt something shift in her chest, not certainty or answers, just the beginning of a question she had not known she needed to ask. The cold air hit her face like a benediction. Snow fell in thick flakes covering the sidewalk and the parked cars and the city in a blanket of white that made everything clean and new. Christmas lights blinked from storefronts and apartment windows, and somewhere in the distance, Claire heard carolers singing about peace on earth and goodwill toward men. David pulled his jacket tighter and glanced at her. The bus stop is 2 blocks that way. We can walk or I can call an Uber if... Let's walk. You sure? Those heels don't look... I'll be fine. She was not fine. The Louboutins were designed for carpeted boardrooms and polished marble floors, not icy sidewalks slick with new snow. But Claire had not gotten where she was by admitting weakness, so she walked each step careful and deliberate, focusing on balance and forward motion. They did not speak much during those 2 blocks. David kept glancing at her, ready to offer an arm or assistance, but Claire kept her gaze forward, determined to navigate this terrain on her own terms. When they reached this bus stop, her feet ached and her toes had gone numb, but she had not fallen. Small victories still counted. The bus shelter offered minimal protection from the wind. David checked his phone for the schedule. Should be here in 4 minutes. Claire nodded, watching her breath form clouds in the cold air. A bus ride. When was the last time she had taken public transportation? In college, probably before she had clawed her way up from nothing to something, before town cars and drivers and the insulation that wealth provided from the ordinary mechanics of daily life. This is different for you, David said. It was not a question. Yes, you don't have to do this. We can... Claire cut him off. I want to. 3 other people joined them at the bus stop. A woman in scrubs, probably just finishing a shift at one of the nearby hospitals. A teenager with headphones nodding along to music Claire could not hear. An elderly man carrying shopping bags that suggested last-minute Christmas preparations. None of them looked at Claire's coat or her shoes or seemed to register that she did not belong. They simply waited, accustomed to the rhythm of buses and schedules and the communal patience required for public transit. The bus arrived with a hydraulic hiss, and David gestured for Claire to board first. She climbed the steps, fumbling slightly with her purse as she searched for what a Metro card cash. She had not considered the practical mechanics of bus travel. I got it, David said quietly, swiping a card twice. They moved toward the back, taking seats near the window. The bus was maybe a third full, other Christmas Eve travelers heading home, or to celebrations, or wherever this night was taking them. Claire settled into the worn seat, feeling the subtle vibration of the engine through the floor, and watched the city slide past the fogged windows. Storefronts with closed signs and holiday decorations. Streetlights casting yellow pools on white snow. The occasional glimpse through windows of families gathered around dinner tables, their silhouettes framed by warm light. This was a city she had lived in for 20 years, without really seeing moving through it in the insulated bubble of wealth and convenience. David sat beside her, not quite touching, but close enough that she felt his warmth. He did not try to fill the silence with small talk, and Claire found herself grateful for that. She needed the quiet to process what she was doing, following a stranger to his home on Christmas Eve, because his 7-year-old daughter had drawn a picture and a barista had brought her free coffee. The logic was absurd. Every instinct she had honed over 15 years of building a company, from nothing to something worth hundreds of millions, said to get off at the next stop, call her driver, return to the penthouse and the known quantity of her own company. But something stronger than logic or instinct kept her seated, watching the city pass. The bus lurched to a stop on 7th Street. David stood. "This is us." Claire followed him off the bus and onto a sidewalk that had been partially cleared but was already accumulating new snow. The building in front of them was old but well-maintained red brick with white shutters and a row of mailboxes by the front door. It looked solid, permanent, the kind of place where families stayed for generations rather than treating residences as temporary investments. David unlocked the main door and held it open. The hallway inside smelled like someone had been cooking pot roast, and Claire heard the muffled sound of a television playing in one of the ground floor apartments. The staircase was narrow wood, worn smooth by decades of footsteps, and as they climbed to the second floor, each step creaked in a different register, creating a kind of unintentional music. This was nothing like her penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and marble countertops and the aggressive silence of expensive insulation. This building breathed and settled and made noise full of life even when unseen. David stopped at a door marked 2C and fumbled with his keys for a moment before the lock turned. He stepped inside and Claire followed, crossing a threshold into a life utterly different from her own. The apartment was small, a living room that flowed directly into a kitchen, no walls to separate the spaces, a hallway that probably led to 2 bedrooms. But it was warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the presence of love made visible. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, maybe 5 feet tall, branches heavy with homemade ornaments, construction paper snowflakes, popsicle stick reindeer. A star at the top made from aluminum foil, slightly crooked, catching the light from a nearby lamp. Under the tree, a handful of presents wrapped in newspaper and tied with string. And on the couch, curled under a blanket, was Emma. She was small for 7, Claire thought, with dark hair that fell across her face in sleep. Her cheeks were still flushed, the remnant of fever, and her breathing carried a slight wheeze that suggested the illness had not completely released its grip. The television played quietly, some cartoon with bright colors and cheerful music, but Emma's eyes were closed. David crossed the room and knelt beside her, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead. Still warm, he murmured more to himself than to Claire. He adjusted the blanket, tucked it around her shoulders with infinite care, and when he stood, his expression held something that went beyond love. Pride, grief, hope, all tangled together in a way Claire did not fully understand but recognized nonetheless. "She's beautiful," Claire whispered. David looked at his daughter with eyes that saw everything. "She looks like her mom. Same hair, same stubborn chin." Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion clouded her face, and then she saw David and smiled. A sleepy, genuine smile that made Claire's chest ache in ways she could not name. "Daddy," Emma whispered, "you're back. I'm back, baby." Emma's gaze shifted to Claire, and there was no shyness in it, no hesitation. Just curiosity. "Are you Daddy's friend?" Claire moved closer, kneeling so she was at Emma's level. "I hope so." "I'm Claire. I'm Emma." She coughed, a rough sound that made David wince. "Did Daddy show you my picture?" "He did. It's beautiful." Emma's smile widened. "Do you like cookies?" "I do." "Good, because Daddy said we could bake some tonight, but I don't think I can get up." She looked at David, apologetic. "I'm sorry, Daddy." "Hey." David sat on the edge of the couch, brushing hair from Emma's face with fingers that trembled slightly. "You don't apologize for being sick. We'll bake cookies another time." But it's Christmas Eve, and Emma's lower lip trembled, and Claire saw David's resolve waver. She stood crossing to the small kitchen without fully planning the movement. Opened the fridge. Butter eggs. A cupboard revealed a half-empty bag of flour. Sugar in a plastic container that had seen better days. The basic ingredients of something ordinary made special by intention. What if Claire turned back to them, the words forming as she spoke? We bake cookies here. Emma can tell us what to do and we'll do the work. That way she can still be part of it. Emma's eyes lit up with hope that made her look even younger than 7. David stared at Claire like she had just offered him something he did not know how to accept. You don't have to. I want to. Claire interrupted and realized she meant it really. She did not know why exactly. Maybe it was the way Emma looked at her father like he was the entire universe compressed into one person. Maybe it was the homemade Christmas tree and the smell of cookies baking that was more memory than actual scent. Maybe it was the fact that for the first time in months, maybe years, Claire felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They baked cookies. Emma directed from the couch, her voice small but determined. More sugar, Daddy. No more than that. And Miss Claire, you have to crack the eggs with one hand or it's bad luck. Claire had never cracked an egg with one hand in her life. The first attempt resulted in shell and yolk mixing together in a mess that made Emma giggle a sound like bells. The second one worked barely, and David caught her eye across the counter and smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. They worked in a kind of rhythm that felt choreographed despite never having done this together before. David measured, Claire mixed. Somewhere along the way, flour ended up on David's shirt and butter on Claire's sleeve. Emma laughed at them both, and the sound filled the small apartment like light pushing back shadows Claire had not realized she was carrying. The first batch came out of the oven, slightly misshapen and burned on the edges. Emma declared them perfect. David brought her one still warm, and she took a small bite before handing it to Claire. You try. Claire took a bite, too sweet, slightly underbaked in the middle, and the best thing she had tasted in years. Perfect, she agreed. Emma's smile was radiant. Can Miss Claire stay for Christmas? David froze. Claire felt her heart skip. The question hung in the air, impossibly large. Emma, David started, his voice gentle. Miss Claire probably has plans. I don't. Claire interrupted before she could stop herself. I don't have plans. Emma sat up a little straighter despite her obvious exhaustion. So you can stay. Claire thought about her penthouse, silent and cold. The corporate retreat she was supposed to be planning. The PR crisis waiting in her inbox. All the reasons she should say no arranged themselves in neat rows in her mind, logical and insurmountable. I'd like that, she heard herself say. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and before Claire could ask if she was okay, the little girl had launched herself forward, arms wrapping around Claire's neck in a hug that was fierce and desperate and full of a need Claire recognized because she felt it too. Thank you, Emma whispered against her shoulder. Daddy needs someone. He won't say it, but he does. Claire held her carefully, afraid she might break. Over Emma's shoulder, she saw David standing in the kitchen, one hand pressed flat against the counter, his eyes closed. When he opened them, there were tears on his face. Okay, he said roughly. Okay. That night, Emma fell asleep on the couch again, exhausted by fever and excitement in equal measure. David carried her to her room, and Claire heard him murmuring something too quiet to make out, followed by the soft click of a door closing. Claire stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes that did not really need washing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had agreed to spend Christmas with people she had just met. She had inserted herself into their lives with the kind of presumption that should have felt wrong but instead felt inevitable, like a door she had been walking toward without realizing it existed. When David came back, he found her standing by the window, looking out at the snow that continued to fall, blanketing the city in silence. She's out, fever's down, she'll be okay. Good. David came to stand beside her, close enough that Claire could feel his warmth, but not quite touching. I don't know what we're doing, me either, but I'm glad you're here. Claire turned to face him, and in the dim light from the kitchen, she saw vulnerability in his expression that matched her own. Me too. You can sleep in my room, David said quickly. I'll take the couch. David, I just want you to be comfortable. Claire heard what he was not saying, the careful boundaries he was trying to establish. I'm comfortable. And she was. In this small apartment, with its creaking floors and homemade Christmas tree, Claire felt more at ease than she had in her penthouse in months, not because the space was better, but because it was full of love and hope, and the stubborn belief that tomorrow might be different from today. They stayed up late talking in low voices so they would not wake Emma. David told her about his wife, about the way cancer had stolen her slowly, and then all at once leaving him with a daughter who needed everything and memories that hurt more than their absence. Claire told him about her divorce, about the way success had become a prison she had built for herself, trading everything else for the illusion of control. They did not try to fix each other. They just listened, and somehow that was enough. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, Claire fell asleep on the couch, her head tilting sideways until it rested against the cushion. David watched her for a moment. This woman who had waited 47 minutes for him, who had come to his home and baked cookies with his daughter, and somehow made everything feel less impossible. He retrieved the blanket from Emma's room, the one with stars on it, and covered Claire, gently tucking it around her shoulders the way he had with Emma earlier. She did not wake, just sighed and settled deeper into sleep. David sat in the chair across from her, too wired to sleep himself, and thought about the strange mathematics of chance. How many decisions had led to this moment, Margaret connecting them? Emma drawing a picture, Claire choosing to wait instead of leave, the fever breaking just in time for him to make the date even 47 minutes late. If any single variable had changed, this moment would not exist. Claire would be in her penthouse, and he would be alone with Emma, and the possibility of something different would have passed them by unknown and unmissed. But here they were. David finally dozed off sometime after 3, his head tilted back against the chair, and when he woke, gray morning light was filtering through the window. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the world outside pristine and quiet. Claire still slept on the couch, and for a moment David just watched her, this stranger who was becoming something else, without either of them having planned it. Her coat had slipped from the back of the couch to the floor, and in sleep the careful composure she wore like armor had softened into something more vulnerable. He stood quietly and moved to the kitchen, started coffee by muscle memory. The apartment was cold. The heat in this building never worked quite right, but the smell of brewing coffee made it feel warmer. Outside, the city was beginning to wake up. A car passed, chains rattling against snow. Somewhere a door opened and closed. Christmas morning arriving for everyone, not just them. Emma appeared in the hallway, still in her pajamas, eyes bright despite the fever. Sad. David turned, surprised. "Hey, baby, you should be resting." "I'm okay." She moved into the living room and stopped when she saw Claire sleeping on the couch. She stayed. She stayed. Emma climbed onto the couch, carefully settling near Claire's feet, and just stared at her with the unself-conscious intensity of childhood. "She's pretty." "She is. Do you like her?" David poured coffee into 2 mugs, considering his answer. "Yeah, I do. Like her, Emma," she giggled, the sound still carrying a rough edge from being sick. "It's okay if you do. I think she likes you too. How do you know?" "Because she waited, and she came here, and she helped us make cookies even though her clothes were fancy." Emma's logic was unassailable in the way that children's logic often was, cutting through complication to simple truth. Grown-ups don't do that unless they like someone. "Maybe you're right." "I'm always right," Emma said, that the confidence of someone who had never encountered evidence to the contrary. "Can I wake her up?" Santa came. "Let her sleep a little longer. She had a long night." "But it's Christmas." "I know. Just a few more minutes." Emma sighed dramatically but settled back against the couch, content to wait. David brought one of the coffee mugs to the living room and sat in the chair he had dozed in earlier, watching his daughter watch Claire, and feeling something unfamiliar and fragile building in his chest. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of hope, which was close enough to the real thing that he would take it. Claire stirred a few minutes later, eyes opening slowly, disoriented. She blinked, taking in the unfamiliar ceiling, the Christmas tree, Emma sitting cross-legged near her feet, and finally David in the chair with coffee steam rising between them. "Morning," David said quietly. "Coffee, please." Emma bounced once. "You're awake," Santa came. Claire sat up, and the blanket slipped from her shoulders. She looked rumpled and confused, and somehow more real than she had last night in the cafe, all polish and protection. "What time is it?" "Just after 7. I fell asleep." "You were tired." Claire ran a hand through her hair, a gesture that was more reflex than vanity. "I should probably," Emma interrupted, tugging at Claire's hand. "You have to see the presents. Come on." There was no resisting Emma's enthusiasm. David had learned that years ago. Claire allowed herself to be pulled from the couch and led to the Christmas tree, where Emma dropped to her knees and began inspecting the presents with serious concentration. "This one's for Daddy." Emma announced, then picked up a smaller package. And this one's for me. And this one, she paused, looking up at Claire with sudden uncertainty. I didn't know you were coming, so I don't have one for you. That's okay, Claire said, kneeling beside her. I didn't bring anything either. But it's Christmas. You're supposed to have presents. Emma, David's voice carried gentle warning. It's fine. But Emma was already moving determinedly, crawling across the floor to her room. They heard drawers opening, things being moved around, then silence. When she reappeared, she carried something wrapped in plastic and newspaper clutched carefully in both hands. She thrust it towards Claire. I made this yesterday. Daddy wrapped it for me because I couldn't do it right. Claire's hands shook slightly as she took the package and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a cookie, heart-shaped, decorated with red frosting, and in Emma's unsteady hand the words, "Thank you for waiting." Claire could not speak. She just held the cookie and felt tears slide down her cheeks, hot and unfamiliar. Emma crawled into her lap, small arms wrapping around her neck. Don't be sad. It's Christmas. I'm not sad, Claire managed. I'm happy. Good, Emma pulled back, looking at her seriously. Daddy says being real is better than being perfect. Are you real? Claire looked at David, who was watching them with an expression she could not quite name. I'm trying to be. Emma nodded, satisfied. Then you can stay. They spent Christmas morning together, the three of them and no one else. They ate cookies for breakfast. Emma's idea enthusiastically approved by all parties. They opened presents that were small and thoughtful, and nothing like the expensive gifts Claire usually exchanged with colleagues and clients. Emma gave David a drawing of the three of them standing in front of a house that looked nothing like the apartment, but had flowers in the yard and a sun with rays like eyelashes. David gave Emma a new set of crayons, 64 colors, in a box that was mostly empty space but treasure nonetheless. Claire had brought nothing, but Emma did not seem to mind or even really notice. Around noon, Claire's phone buzzed. Margaret. She let it go to voicemail. Then a minute later, it buzzed again. And again. You don't have to stay, David said, coming to stand beside her in the kitchen. If you need to go, I understand. Claire looked at him. This man who had shown up 47 minutes late and apologized too many times, who baked cookies with flour in his hair and loved his daughter more than anything, and still somehow had room in his heart to let Claire in. I know I don't have to, she said, but I want to. David's hand found hers, rough calluses against smooth skin. It was the same question he had asked in the cafe, and this time Claire had an answer. Because you waited too. You didn't give up on tonight even when you had every reason to. You came anyway. And I think she stopped, steadied herself. I think that's what love is. Showing up, especially when it's hard. Claire, David's fingers tightened around hers. I don't know what this is. I don't either, she interrupted. I don't know where it's going. But I know I haven't felt this real in a long time, and I don't want to let that go. Emma appeared in the doorway, dragging her blanket. Are you guys done talking? I want to watch a movie, David laughed, a sound that was half sob, half joy. Yeah, baby, we're done talking. They watched a movie, some animated thing about a snowman and magic and believing. Emma fell asleep between them, partway through, her head on Claire's shoulder, her feet in David's lap. Claire felt the weight of her, warm and trusting, and thought about all the things she had been chasing for so long. Success, recognition, control, proof that she was enough. None of it mattered as much as this. The movie's ending credits rolled across the screen, accompanied by music that was aggressively cheerful. Claire shifted slightly, careful not to wake Emma, whose breath had settled into the deep rhythm of genuine sleep. David reached for the remote and muted the television, plunging the apartment into a quiet broken, only by the radiator's occasional clank and the distant sound of someone's Christmas music bleeding through the walls. Claire's phone vibrated in her coat pocket for what felt like the 100th time. She had been ignoring it for hours now, watching the screen light up with incoming calls and messages, each one a small invasion from the world she had temporarily abandoned. Margaret, her assistant. Unknown numbers that were probably board members who had somehow obtained her personal cell. The urgency of other people's needs pressing against the boundaries of this fragile moment. David noticed. You can check it. I won't be offended. It can wait. Can it? The question carried no judgment, just curiosity. Claire looked at Emma's sleeping face, peaceful in a way that suggested the fever had finally broken completely. then at David, whose eyes reflected concern she had not earned yet, but somehow had anyway. Her phone vibrated again. This time she pulled it out. 17 missed calls, 23 unread messages. The most recent was from Margaret, marked urgent. Claire, I know you're with David, but this is serious. Richard leaked the restructuring plans to Bloomberg. The board is convening an emergency session tomorrow. They need you there. Claire's stomach dropped. Richard Chen, her CFO, the man she had hired 5 years ago because he was brilliant with numbers and utterly terrible at loyalty. She had known for weeks that something was wrong, had seen the signs in his increasing aggression during meetings, his sudden interest in consulting contracts with their competitors. But she had been handling it quietly, carefully, the way you handled a bomb you were trying to defuse without alerting anyone to the danger. Apparently, quiet had not been quiet enough. She scrolled through the other messages. Her attorney, her publicist, 2 board members, all variations on the same theme: crisis, emergency, need immediate response. The kind of corporate wildfire that could destroy everything she had built if not contained immediately. David watched her face. Bad news. My CFO just sabotaged a major restructuring we've been planning for 6 months. The board is she stopped, suddenly aware of how absurd this must sound. It's complicated. Do you need to go? Claire looked at Emma, still sleeping, then at the homemade Christmas tree with its aluminum foil star, then at David, who was giving her an out without making her feel guilty for taking it. This man, who barely knew her, was offering her freedom to return to her real life, and somehow that generosity made leaving feel impossible. Not yet, she heard herself say. Not right now, but soon. Maybe. David nodded, and Claire saw understanding in his expression that went beyond mere acceptance. He knew she did not fully belong here, had probably known from the moment she walked into his apartment in her expensive coat and designer heels. The miracle was not that she had come, but that he had let her. Emma stirred, eyes opening slowly. Is the movie over? Yeah, baby, David said softly. How are you feeling? Better. Emma sat up, rubbing her eyes. Can we have lunch? I'm hungry. That's a good sign. David stood carefully, moving Emma's feet from his lap. What do you want? Grilled cheese. Coming right up. He disappeared into the kitchen, and Emma turned to Claire with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. Do you have to go back to your house eventually? Is your house nice? Claire thought about her penthouse, all 3,000 square feet of it, empty except for furniture selected by a designer who specialized in creating spaces that looked like no one lived there. It's big. Do you live there alone? Yes, that sounds lonely. The observation landed with unexpected force. Claire had spent years telling herself that solitude was different from loneliness, that choosing to be alone meant you were strong rather than abandoned. But Emma's simple assessment stripped away the careful distinction, revealing the truth underneath. It is lonely, Claire admitted. Sometimes. You can stay here if you want. We have an extra bedroom. Daddy uses it for his office, but there's a bed. Emma's offer was guileless, delivered with the absolute certainty that problems had simple solutions if you were just willing to implement them. That's very kind. Daddy gets lonely too. He doesn't say it, but I can tell. When he thinks I'm sleeping, sometimes he sits in the living room and just stares at pictures of Mommy. He doesn't cry anymore, but he looks like he wants to. Claire felt something crack open in her chest. She reached out and smoothed Emma's hair, a gesture that felt natural despite having no practice. He loves you very much, I know. But that's different from having a grown-up to talk to. Kids can't fix everything, even though we try. From the kitchen came the sound of butter sizzling in a pan and David's voice: grilled cheese in 5 minutes. Emma leaned against Claire's shoulder. I'm glad you came. Me too. Are you going to stay forever? I don't know, but you want to. Claire considered lying, softening the truth into something more appropriate for a 7-year-old. But Emma was looking at her with eyes that had already seen too much: a mother's illness, a mother's death, a father's grief inadequately hidden, and deserved honesty more than comfort. Part of me wants to, Claire said carefully, but life is complicated. Daddy says that too. Emma's voice carried the weight of someone who had heard this explanation before and found it insufficient. I think grown-ups make things complicated when they don't have to be. Maybe you're right. They ate grilled cheese sandwiches on paper plates in the living room because Emma declared eating at the table was boring, and it was Christmas, and Christmas was for breaking rules. David did not argue, just brought over chips and juice bars and settled onto the floor with his plate balanced on his knee. Claire sat on the couch watching them, and felt like an anthropologist observing a species she had once belonged to but had forgotten the customs of. Casual meals, casual conversation, the easy intimacy of people who did not need to perform for each other. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, Margaret's name lighting up the screen. Claire hesitated, then stood and moved to the small hallway, answering with her voice low. Margaret, thank God. Margaret's relief was audible. I've been trying to reach you for hours. I know, I'm sorry. It's been, Claire, you need to come back, tonight. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9, and if you're not there, they're going to vote on emergency measures. Richard is spinning this as evidence that you've lost focus, that the company needs new leadership. That's insane. I've increased our value by 40% in 3 years. I know that. You know that. But Richard has been planting seeds for months, and this leak is exactly the ammunition he needed. Margaret's voice carried urgency that bordered on panic. Where are you right now? I'm with David. Silence then. Still Claire, the date was yesterday. It's Christmas Day. You've been with him for what, 18 hours? Something like that. More silence. Claire could practically hear Margaret recalibrating, trying to understand what was happening. Is everything okay? Did something happen? No. Yes, I don't know. Claire leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. I just needed this. Needed what? Something real. Something that isn't. She gestured helplessly, even though Margaret could not see her all of this. I understand that. I do. But Claire, you've worked too hard to let Richard Chen steal your company because you decided to have a Christmas breakthrough. You can have real after you handle this. Can I? What Claire heard herself asking the question she had been avoiding. Can I go back to that life after this? Wake up in an empty apartment and spend 14 hours a day managing crises and come home to silence and call it success? Margaret's voice softened. You're allowed to have both, work and happiness. They're not mutually exclusive, aren't they? Claire thought about the women she knew who ran companies. Most were divorced or had never married. The ones with families always seemed to be apologizing to their children for traveling to their boards, for needing flexibility, to everyone for taking up space while female. The math never worked. Something always had to give. Come back tonight, Margaret said gently. Handle the board meeting. Save your company. Then go back to David and Emma and figure out what you want. But don't let Richard win because you were too scared to choose yourself. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You built that company. You get to decide what happens to it. From the living room, Claire heard Emma laugh at something David said, the sound bright and uncomplicated. She thought about returning to the penthouse, putting on armor in the form of a power suit, walking into a boardroom, and fighting battles she had fought 1,000 times before. The exhaustion of it felt crushing. But Margaret was right. She had built Montgomery Enterprises from nothing. Had sacrificed relationships and sleep, and sometimes her own ethics to create something that mattered. She could not let Richard Chen destroy it because she had spent one perfect day baking cookies with a man she barely knew and his daughter. Okay, Claire heard herself say. I'll be there. Thank you. Margaret's relief was palpable. I'll send a car. Where are you? Claire gave her the address, then ended the call and stood in the hallway for a long moment, gathering herself. When she returned to the living room, David looked up from his plate, and she saw understanding in his eyes before she spoke. You have to go, he said. It was not a question. There's a crisis at work. I need to handle it. I understand. Claire sat back down on the couch, but the ease of earlier had evaporated. I'm sorry. Don't be. You have a life, responsibilities. Emma looked between them, confusion creasing her forehead. But you just got here. I know, baby, Claire said, and the endearment slipped out before she could stop it. But sometimes grown-ups have to do things even when they don't want to. You don't want to go? No, I don't. Then stay. Emma's logic remained unassailable. If you don't want to go and you don't have to go, then you should stay. It's not that simple. Why not? David intervened gently. Emma, Miss Claire has important work. She runs a big company. How big? Very big, Claire said. Thousands of people work there. Oh, Emma processed this. So if you don't go, there'll be something like that. Emma nodded slowly, and Claire saw her trying to be mature, trying to understand adult complications that should not have to be explained to 7-year-olds. Okay, but you'll come back. Claire looked at David, who was carefully not looking at her. I don't know. The honesty felt cruel, but Emma deserved it. She had already experienced enough false promises every time her mother said she would be fine, every assurance that life would go back to normal, to recognize when adults were lying to make things easier. My car will be here in 20 minutes, Claire said. I should probably get ready. She gathered her coat and bag, checked her reflection in her phone camera, and was startled by how different she looked. Hair disheveled, no makeup, the careful polish she maintained for the outside world completely absent. She looked tired and real and more like herself than she had in years. David walked her to the door while Emma finished her sandwich in the living room. The hallway felt impossibly narrow, forcing them close together, and Claire was suddenly aware of every breath, every small movement. Thank you, she said, for letting me stay, for everything. You don't have to thank me, I do though. David leaned against the door frame and Claire saw something complicated in his expression. I Googled you last night, after Emma fell asleep. Claire felt her stomach drop. Oh. Claire Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Enterprises. Net worth estimated at $200 million. Featured in Forbes' most powerful women in business 3 years running. His voice was neutral, but Claire heard the distance creeping in. You could have mentioned that. Would it have changed anything? I don't know. Maybe. He ran a hand through his hair. A gesture Claire was learning meant he was processing something difficult. I'm a plumber with a 2-bedroom apartment in medical debt I'll probably never finish paying off. And he gestured vaguely, So you're going to go back to your real life and realize this was a nice story you can tell at dinner parties. The time you spent Christmas with normal people. That's not fair, Claire said, and felt anger rising. You don't get to decide what this meant to me. Then what did it mean? The question hung between them, demanding truth. Claire thought about everything she could say, all the careful diplomatic answers that would preserve everyone's dignity. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. It meant everything, she said quietly. For 18 hours, I got to be someone other than the person I've been pretending to be for 15 years. I got to just exist without having to prove or achieve or fight for anything. And you and Emma let me do that without asking for anything in return. So no, this wasn't a story for dinner parties. This was the first time I felt alive in longer than I can remember. David's expression shifted, walls coming down. I'm scared. Of what? That you'll realize what you're giving up. That 3 days from now, you'll wake up in your penthouse and remember you have a company worth hundreds of millions and a life that matters to thousands of people, and this us will seem small and not worth the sacrifice. Claire reached for his hand. I'm scared too. I'm terrified that I'll go back and get swallowed by everything I've been running from, and I'll convince myself this was a detour instead of a destination. But being scared doesn't make it less real. What do we do? Show up, Claire said, echoing her own words from the cafe. Keep showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Her phone buzzed. The car was outside. David pulled her into a hug, and Claire let herself be held, breathing in the scent of laundry detergent and coffee, and something uniquely him. When they pulled apart, his eyes were wet. Come back, he said. Please come back. I will. When as soon as I can. Claire pressed a kiss to his cheek, brief and chaste, but carrying the weight of promises she did not yet know how to keep. Take care of Emma. Tell her I said goodbye. She will not understand. I know. Claire stepped back, collecting her coat and bag. But she'll forgive me eventually, and that's more than I deserve. She left before she could change her mind, walking down the narrow staircase with its creaking steps, through the hallway that smelled like pot roast and community, out into the cold where a black town car waited with its engine running. The driver opened the door and Claire slid into the leather interior, into the insulated bubble of wealth and convenience that separated people like her from the world David and Emma inhabited. The car pulled away from the curb, and Claire watched the red brick building disappear behind them, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life or the only choice that made sense. Her phone came alive with notifications the moment she allowed herself to check it. Emails, texts, news alerts. The Bloomberg article had gone live an hour ago. Montgomery Enterprises in turmoil as CFO reveals plans for massive restructuring. Anonymous sources claim the restructuring would result in layoffs, office closures, a complete reorganization that Claire had never approved because it was a distortion of the actual plan. Richard had taken her carefully considered strategy for controlled growth and twisted it into something that sounded like corporate pillaging. The stock price had already dropped 8%. Social media was lighting up with commentary from people who had never met her but were certain she was everything wrong with capitalism. And her board, the people she had hand-selected and cultivated, were apparently ready to throw her overboard at the first sign of rough water. She spent the car ride drafting a statement, making calls, doing damage control. By the time they reached her building, she had transformed back into Claire Montgomery, CEO, the woman who did not flinch or hesitate or doubt. The doorman greeted her with professional warmth, and she took the private elevator to the 42nd floor to the penthouse that cost more than David would earn in a lifetime. The apartment was exactly as she had left it, immaculate, empty. The cleaning service had been through erasing any evidence that a human lived here. The kitchen gleamed unused. The living room looked like a showroom. Even her bedroom, her private sanctuary, carried the sterile perfection of a five-star hotel. Claire stood in the center of the living room and felt the silence press against her eardrums. No Emma's laughter, no David's quiet presence. No warmth or life or any indication that the universe contained anything except glass and steel and the aggressive neutrality of expensive taste. She unpacked her bag, discovering Emma's cookie, wrapped carefully in plastic at the bottom. The frosting had smudged, but the words were still legible. "Thank you for waiting." Claire set it on the kitchen counter, then stared at it for a long moment before crying in a way she had not cried since her marriage ended. Deep, wrenching cries that came from somewhere beneath her ribs, releasing months of careful control. She cried for the life she had built that felt increasingly like a prison. She cried for David and Emma, who deserved better than someone who kept running away. And she cried for herself, for the woman who had gotten lost somewhere between ambition and arrival. When the tears finally stopped, Claire washed her face, put on her armor in the form of an Armani suit, and spent the rest of Christmas night preparing for war. The board meeting would determine everything, and Claire Montgomery had never lost a fight that mattered. The boardroom on the 57th floor of Montgomery Tower felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Claire arrived at 8:45, 15 minutes early, her Armani suit pressed to perfection and her expression revealing nothing. The conference table could seat 20, but only 12 chairs were occupied, each board member positioned like chess pieces in a game she had not realized she was playing. Richard Chen sat at the far end, his posture relaxed in a way that signaled confidence. He had dressed carefully for this moment, choosing a navy suit that suggested stability and a burgundy token that whispered power. When Claire entered, he did not stand or acknowledge her beyond a slight nod, a calculated dismissal that told everyone present exactly what he thought of her authority. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Patricia Holbrook, who had served on the board since the company's inception, met Claire's eyes with something that looked like apology. James Whitmore studied his coffee with sudden fascination. Even Marcus Chen, no relation to Richard despite the shared surname, who had once told Claire she reminded him of his daughter, could not quite look at her directly. Claire took her seat at the head of the table, set her leather portfolio down with precision, and waited. Silence was a weapon she had learned to wield early in her career, and she deployed it now, letting the discomfort build until someone felt compelled to break it. Patricia cleared her throat. "Claire, thank you for coming on such short notice. My company was being publicly dismantled. Where else would I be?" Richard leaned forward, his voice carrying false concern. "We were worried you might not make it. Given your," he paused delicately, "recent absence. I took Christmas off. That's hardly unprecedented. You took Christmas off without informing anyone of your whereabouts while a major crisis was unfolding." Richard's smile did not reach his eyes. Some might call that abandoning ship, and some might call leaking confidential strategic plans to the press, corporate espionage. Claire replied, her voice pleasant as poison. "But I'm sure we'll get to that." The tension in the room crystallized into something sharp enough to draw blood. James Whitmore shifted in his chair, finally looking up from his coffee. "Perhaps we should review what actually happened before accusations start flying." Patricia nodded, pulling out a tablet. The Bloomberg article published yesterday afternoon claims Montgomery Enterprises is planning a restructuring that will eliminate 30% of our workforce and close our Chicago and Seattle offices. The article cites anonymous sources with knowledge of the plan. Those sources would be fictional, Claire said calmly, because that plan doesn't exist. Richard's expression remained neutral. The article contains details that could only have come from someone with access to our internal planning documents. It contains distortions of details from our growth strategy proposal, Claire corrected, which I presented to this board 6 months ago and which you all approved. The actual plan involves strategic expansion, not contraction. But someone took elements from that proposal and twisted them into something designed to tank our stock price. And you think that someone was me, Richard said, still smiling. I think you're the only person with both access and motive. Claire pulled out her own tablet, began pulling up documents. You've been in discussions with Stellar Industries for the past 3 months. Preliminary talks about a consulting position that would begin immediately after you leave Montgomery Enterprises. That's a lie. Claire turned her tablet to face the board showing emails she had obtained through methods she would not discuss. These are from Stellar's VP of Operations. They reference multiple meetings, salary negotiations, and one particularly interesting exchange where you promised to provide inside knowledge about our expansion strategy. The room went very quiet. Patricia leaned forward to examine the screen, her expression hardening. Marcus finally looked at Claire directly, and she saw calculation in his eyes reassessing the situation. Richard's composure cracked slightly. Those are taken out of context. The context seems pretty clear. James said, his earlier discomfort replaced by anger. You've been shopping our secrets to a competitor while simultaneously trying to undermine Claire's leadership. I've been protecting this company from reckless expansion that could bankrupt us. Richard's voice rose. Claire has been distracted for months. Ever since her divorce, she's been making increasingly erratic decisions, such as she approved the Technova acquisition without proper due diligence. She signed off on the Miami office expansion, despite clear market indicators suggesting it would fail. And for the past week, Richard gestured dismissively, she's been completely unreachable while our stock price collapsed. The Technova acquisition increased our market share by 18%. Claire said, her voice still level. The Miami office is on track to exceed projections by the end of Q2. And I was unreachable for exactly 36 hours over Christmas, which you used to plant a story designed to create a crisis that would justify this meeting. Patricia was scrolling through documents on her tablet. Richard, these emails are damning. If Claire is correct about your negotiations with Stellar, she's not correct. Richard stood abruptly. She's desperate to deflect attention from her own failures. Sit down, Marcus said quietly, and something in his tone made Richard comply. We're going to take a 10-minute recess. Claire, Richard, you'll both wait outside while the board confers. Claire gathered her things and walked out with her head high, feeling the weight of Richard's anger following her. In the hallway, they stood on opposite ends of the space, not speaking until Richard finally broke the silence. You won't win this, he said. Even if they side with you today, I've already done the damage. The market thinks you are unstable. Your reputation is compromised. My reputation survived building a company from nothing. It'll survive you. You're making a mistake. Richard moved closer, lowering his voice. I could have been an ally. We could have built something together. I don't build things with people who leak confidential information to sabotage me. Is that what you think this is? Sabotage? Richard laughed, sharp and bitter. This is a wake-up call. You've been sleepwalking through your own life for months, and everyone can see it. The divorce broke something in you. The words landed harder than Claire wanted to admit. She thought about the past 6 months, the morning she had woken up and gone through the motions without fully engaging the decisions she had made on autopilot, while some essential part of her retreated further inward. Maybe it did, Claire said quietly, but that doesn't give you the right to burn down what I built. Before Richard could respond, the boardroom door opened. Patricia stepped out. We're ready. The board had reached a decision. Claire could see it in Patricia's face, in the set of her shoulders, in the way she avoided looking at Richard as she spoke. The board has voted to retain Claire as CEO and to terminate Richard's employment effective immediately. Richard's face went white. You can't. We can, and we are. Marcus had followed Patricia into the hallway. You violated your fiduciary duty to this company. You're lucky we're not pursuing criminal charges. This is a mistake. The mistake was ours, James added. Appearing behind Marcus, we should have seen what you were doing months ago. Security will escort you to your office to collect personal items. Patricia continued. All company property, including your laptop and phone, will remain here. Your access has already been revoked. 2 security guards appeared as if summoned, and Richard looked between them and the board members with an expression that cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally resignation. He straightened his tie, collected what remained of his dignity, and walked toward the elevators without another word. Claire watched him go, feeling no triumph, just exhaustion. This was what winning looked like: another body removed from the field of play, another crisis managed, another day survived. Patricia touched her arm gently. You should go home. We'll handle the press release and damage control. You need rest. Patricia's voice carried maternal authority that Claire had learned not to argue with. We'll reconvene next week. Until then, take a few days. The dismissal was kind but firm. Claire returned to her office, handled a few urgent emails, and was back in the town car by noon. She gave the driver her penthouse address, then sat in traffic watching the city move around her with the detachment of someone observing life through bulletproof glass. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost declined, then curiosity won out. The voice on the other end was familiar in the worst way. Claire. It's James, not her board member James. Her ex-husband James. James Cartwright, who had shared her bed and her last name for 6 years before deciding he needed someone who knew how to prioritize marriage over mergers. What do you want? I saw the Bloomberg article. I wanted to make sure you're okay. Since when do you care? That's not fair. His voice carried that tone of wounded reasonableness that had always made Claire want to throw things. Just because we didn't work out doesn't mean I stopped caring about you. We didn't work out because you stopped caring about anything except your own comfort. Claire, please, I'm trying to help. How? By calling me the day after my CFO tries to stage a coup to remind me that my personal life is a disaster. Very helpful, James. Thank you. I heard you were with someone on Christmas. His voice shifted, jealousy creeping in around the edges. Margaret mentioned it. Of course she did. Claire felt anger rise, sharp and bright. What business is it of yours? I just want to make sure you're not making decisions based on loneliness rather than logic. You have a tendency to, he paused, seeking the diplomatic phrase, move quickly when you're feeling vulnerable. This conversation is over. Wait. Claire, I've been thinking. About us. About what we threw away. Maybe we moved too fast with the divorce. Maybe if we tried again. Are you serious? I miss you. The words came out rushed, like he had been holding them back and suddenly could not. I miss us. I miss coming home to you. You hated coming home to me. You said I was never really there, remember? Always thinking about work, always 10 steps ahead, never waiting. Her own words from months ago echoed back at her with bitter clarity. You were right about all of it, by the way. So let me help you change. We could start over. We know each other's faults now. We could do better. Claire closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his offer. It would be easy, wouldn't it, to slip back into the familiar pattern of marriage, to have someone waiting at home, even if that someone made her feel like she was perpetually failing at being a wife. Easier than whatever complicated mess she was building with David, with his medical debt and his 2-bedroom apartment and his daughter who deserved more than a part-time presence. No, Claire said quietly. I don't want to do better with you. I want to do different with someone else. This plumber, Margaret said, he's a single father with no money and no prospects. Is that really what you want? To play house with someone so far beneath you? The cruelty was casual, reflexive, the kind of class judgment that Claire had spent years absorbing until she stopped noticing it. Hearing it directed at David made her see clearly how poisonous it had always been. He's not beneath me. If anything, I'm trying to become worthy of him. She ended the call before James could respond, then blocked his number with fingers that trembled slightly. The car was approaching her building, and Claire felt the walls closing in. She could not go back to the penthouse, not yet, not without losing whatever fragile thing she had begun building on Christmas Eve. Change of plans, she told the driver. Can you take me to 7th Street? The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, surprised but professional. Of course, Ms. Montgomery. The drive took 40 minutes in midday traffic, and Claire spent every minute second-guessing her decision. She had left David and Emma less than 24 hours ago. Showing up now, uninvited, felt desperate. But staying away felt worse, like allowing all the reasons they should not work to outweigh the one reason they should, because she wanted to. The red brick building looked different in daylight, less mysterious and more worn. Claire paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, gathering courage. Then she climbed the stairs, each creaking step announcing her arrival, and knocked on apartment 2C. David opened the door in jeans and a t-shirt, surprise clear on his face. Claire. I handled it. The board meeting. I won. That's good. He stepped back, allowing her inside. Congratulations. Emma was at the kitchen table coloring intently. She looked up when Claire entered and her face transformed with joy. Miss Claire, you came back. I came back, Claire confirmed, and found herself swept into a hug that was too tight and too perfect. I'm sorry I left. It's okay. Emma pulled back, studying her face with serious concern. Did you save all those people? I think so. Good. Then it was worth it. Emma returned to her coloring like Claire's sudden reappearance was the most natural thing in the world, and maybe to her it was. David moved into the kitchen, putting distance between them. I didn't expect to see you so soon. I know, I should have called. It's fine. He busied himself with dishes that were already clean. How was it? The meeting. Claire thought about Richard's face when the board sided with her, about James's phone call, and his offer to start over, about the choice that had felt impossible until she made it exhausting. But I'm free for a few days. The board insisted I take time off. That's good. You probably need rest. The formality in his voice hurt more than anger would have. Claire moved closer, forcing him to look at her. I'm not here because I have nowhere else to go. I'm here because this is where I want to be, for now, for as long as you'll have me. David set down the dish he was holding. Claire, I've been thinking about what this is, what it can be, and I don't see how it works. You have a life that's, he gestured helplessly, massive, important. I have a daughter in debt and a job that pays $45,000 a year. Those worlds don't touch. So we build a bridge between them. With what hope? Good intentions. He shook his head. Emma's already attached to you. When you left yesterday, she cried for an hour. She asked me if you were coming back, and I didn't know what to tell her because I don't know. Are you coming back, Claire? Really? Or is this just something you're trying on until you remember who you actually are? The question hung in the air, demanding truth. Claire thought about her penthouse and her empire and the version of herself that had seemed so essential until she discovered it was optional. She thought about Emma's drawing and the cookie with its smudged frosting and the way David had looked at her when she waited 47 minutes without leaving. Emma appeared in the doorway, her coloring abandoned. Are you leaving again? The question shattered something. Claire dropped to her knees so she was eye level with the little girl. No, I'm not leaving, but Daddy thinks you are. Emma's voice carried the weight of someone who had heard this argument before in different words. He thinks everyone leaves eventually. Not everyone, Claire said gently. And not me, not if I can help it. You promise? Claire looked up at David, who was watching them with an expression that mixed hope and terror in equal measure. I promise. Emma wrapped her arms around Claire's neck. Okay, I believe you. In the days that followed, Claire learned what it meant to actually keep a promise rather than just making it. She went back to the penthouse only to pack bags to collect things she needed for an extended stay. She took calls from her office but limited them to urgent matters only. She attended one board meeting via video conference from David's tiny office, aware the entire time that she was participating in her corporate life while sitting in a space where the desk was secondhand and the chair squeaked. She learned David's routines. Coffee at 6 strong and black, toast with too much butter because Emma insisted that was the only right way. The morning ritual of getting Emma ready for school when it resumed after New Year's, the careful choreography of lunch packing and shoe finding, and the eternal question of whether a jacket was necessary. She learned Emma's moods, the way she got quiet when she was scared, loud when she was happy, defiant when she was tired. The stories she loved, anything with princesses who rescued themselves. The foods she hated, green beans, mushrooms, anything that looked squishy. The nightmares that sometimes came sending her padding into David's room at 3 a.m. with her blanket trailing behind her. And she learned herself, or maybe relearned the person she had been before ambition had consumed everything else. The woman who could spend an hour building a blanket fort without checking her phone. Who could find joy in teaching Emma to make pancakes from scratch. Who could sit beside David on the couch in comfortable silence and feel more present than she had in any boardroom. But the contradictions remained. She was Claire Montgomery, CEO, worth $200 million and responsible for thousands of employees. And she was also Claire, who slept on David's couch because sharing his bed felt too fast, but leaving felt impossible. The tension came to a head on New Year's Eve.